Hello, Internet. So this is Alex Krupp, and today I wanted to share something really unusual that's going on with these 5 pawpaw trees that I planted next to my driveway last year. You know, if you know anything about pawpaws, they're known for being extremely slow growing. The saying goes that year 1 they sleep, year 2 they creep, and year 3 they leap. But even though these were planted just over a year ago, the tallest one, the KSU Chappelle at the top of the driveway, is over 7 feet tall. It's 7 feet 2 inches. And the smallest one, the Shenandoah at the bottom, is just under 5 feet. The rest are 5.5 feet. So this is really unusual. Like if you watch other YouTube videos on pawpaws, you'll see that you maybe plant them when they're 10 inches tall, and then a year later they'll be 14 inches, 2 years later 20 inches, or whatever. And this is what the vast majority of people experience. It's what I've always experienced when I've planted them in the past.
But I think I'm starting to figure it out.
Just to share what these are from top to bottom: KSU Chappelle, KSU Atwood, Naomi's Delicious, Susquehanna, and Shenandoah. And the top 3 came from Peaceful Heritage, all purchased size small, June 20th last year. And the bottom 2 were 8-10 inches also, and they came from Logie's in Connecticut. They actually came mid-April, so the top 3 have been in the ground about 14 months, and the bottom 2 16 months. So yeah, so just going over what I've done with these trees, the first thing you'll notice is these tree guards. And these are actually the OESCO tree guards that Judd recommends in his book For the Love of Pawpaws. And I don't know that this is how you're supposed to use them or how they're meant to be used. I think you're meant to just wrap them around the tree trunk, but they actually work really well just using them as cages rather than using metal posts and chicken wire or whatever. What you see here, I've had about 6 feet of tree guard around each tree, and that's enough to mostly clear the branches because the branches naturally curve upwards anyway. So that works really well. And the roll of tree guard isn't cheap by any means. 100 feet of it costs $200. So at 6 feet, that winds up being like 12 bucks a tree. But if you actually do the math, that's just actually vastly cheaper than buying metal stakes and chicken wire. Because the all-in cost is basically the 12 bucks for the tree guard itself, a couple cents for these little plastic fasteners that you buy from OESCO also, and then, $1 for the bamboo stakes and the zip ties to connect the bamboo stakes to the tree guard to prevent it from blowing away. And it's also much faster to set these up. I got these each installed in 5 or 10 minutes per tree rather than the metal stakes and chicken wire, which takes more like an hour a tree. So that's really nice, especially when you're planting a lot of these things. The other thing I did, because these trees all came 8, 10, 12 inches tall, whereas the tree guard is 20 inches tall. So when they were shorter than the tree guard, I just put 40% shade cloth over each tree. And you don't need to do that, as a lot of you probably know, because they're grafted trees. They shouldn't burn as long as they've been hardened off after leaving the nursery. That said, keeping them under the shade cloth for a few months really prevents transplant shock, and in the long run they will grow a lot more, a lot faster under the shade cloth than without it. And that's kind of par for the course with a lot of the things that I've done and that I'm going to recommend. None of them you have to do. The trees won't die if you don't do them, but if you actually do, they will grow a lot faster. And the second thing you'll notice is all the wood chips around these trees, so I'm not letting any weeds grow around them at all. When I planted my first pawpaws back in 2018, I knew they were supposed to be shaded, so I just let giant ferns grow up around them, which turned out is literally the worst thing you can possibly do for them. And those trees look horrible today, frankly. Even being in the ground for 5 seasons, they're much smaller than any of these trees here. That this is only their 2nd season. So, that really shows that the basic theory is that if you let plants grow within a couple of feet of the trees, they compete for nutrients. So the next thing to note about these trees is that the arborvitae behind them naturally forms what's called a north-facing wall in gardening. And what that means is that these are getting full sunlight, and actually more than full sunlight, because full sunlight is defined as 6 to 8 hours of sun per day, whereas these are getting sun all day long. So, if there's 12 hours of sun in a day, they're probably getting like 11 hours and 45 minutes, which is crazy. I have other trees, which I planted at the same time and which I'm taking care of exactly the same way, but they're only getting, 7 or 8 hours of sun per day, which again, technically full sunlight, but just that one difference, they're all, a foot shorter at least. So yeah, obviously not everyone is going to be able to replicate this setup, but yeah, if you have a place like this obviously huge benefit, cannot be understated. So the next thing I've done is to fertilize these right from as soon as I've planted them. I just want to go over some of the products that I've used quickly. So from left to right, we have Plantone, which is the slow release fertilizer I've been using. The theory behind pawpaws, or basically all fruit trees actually, is that you want to fertilize them 3 times a year with slow release fertilizer, usually on May 1st, June 1st, July 1st. And the reason for that, you don't want them to start growing when there's still a risk of frost for the year. And at the same time, you want to give the wood enough time to lignify before the first frost of the year, so you don't want to fertilize them after 4th of July weekend. Second thing is this Coast of Maine lobster compost. So it's actually all gone now, but earlier this year I surrounded all of these trees with a pretty good amount of this lobster compost, and it's obviously providing a lot of micronutrients. And not only that, but it's giving them a decent amount of calcium as well. You don't want to give them so much calcium that it raises the pH of the soil, but having at least a little bit helps keep them healthy. Same with the magnesium sulfate that you see here. I just gave them 1 shot of this last fall, I think, just to keep their leaves dark. If again, pawpaws are not salt tolerant at all, so if you use too much of this, you will kill the trees. So definitely err on the side of caution here, but I think doing it once a year for most people is probably reasonable. Same thing for the garden lime. If you use it once a year in spring, giving them just a little bit of calcium at the start of the year keeps them healthy. So in addition to this, the Plantone slow release fertilizer, I've also been giving them this Peters Professional 20-20-20 quick release fertilizer, and they've been getting that every 2 weeks or so. Once they're a few years old, they shouldn't need this as much anymore, but when they're little, they really need some synthetic fertilizer in addition to just the organic. The next thing is this fish fertilizer. Actually, before this year, I was giving them Neptune's Harvest Fish and Kelp. This year I switched to this Alaska Fish fertilizer because it's less expensive. But again, this isn't, the reason for giving them this isn't because it has, the nitrogen, but just for the micronutrients. And, they've also been getting this every couple weeks. It just keeps them generally healthy and keeps them growing. And this, even though it's 5-1-1, you can still use this, throughout the summer all the way up until September without risking that they'll keep growing and won't have enough time to lignify. The next thing, this is probably, well, it's definitely the most interesting of the products that I'm going to show you here, is this Azos bacteria. And what this is it's actually nitrogen fixing bacteria. And there's 2 benefits. One, it's obviously bacteria that fixes nitrogen, so in theory you shouldn't have to use as much as the synthetic or organic fertilizer on these trees. But not only that, it also helps make it easier for the trees to uptake the nitrogen. And this is important because if you're just dumping the fast release nitrogen on them, then yeah, the plants will get enough to grow, but the plants need to use a significant proportion of their energy harvesting that nitrogen from the soil. Whereas with the bacteria, the claim at least is that the bacteria reduces the amount of energy the plants need to expend uptaking the nitrogen from the soil, so then they have more energy to put into growth. So there's actually a lot of science behind this, but at the very least, it certainly does not seem to have harmed the trees in any way. Next is this Super Thrive stuff, and this is, well, it has micronutrients, but the supposed benefit is, for reducing the risk of transplant shock. So this is something I used, when transplanting the trees originally, but I also just use it on my container figs from time to time, and when there's some left over in the watering can, it just gets dumped on the trees as well, every few weeks. Lastly, this year I started using this chlorine filter I just found on Amazon, and the reason for that is because I was using the Azos bacteria. It didn't make a lot of sense to be dumping bacteria on the trees and then just to be dumping chlorinated city tap water onto them right afterwards, which is, obviously to kill the bacteria. So, yeah, hard to say whether it works or not, but, it's a thing I am doing, so, for what it's worth. So yeah, again, this is all this stuff. Very hard to say whether any individual product is doing anything or not, but I mean, in total, the results kind of speak for themselves, so, take that for what you will. We've talked about sunlight, we've talked about fertilizer. The last thing is obviously watering, and you do just kind of have to get a feel for when these things need water. What I've found is that in spring, when it's going from the low 60s to like the low 80s, and they really need water every single day. And when it's in the 90s, they need water, pretty much every day. But if it goes from the 90s down to the low 80s, then by that point, they probably have enough heat tolerance that they don't need to get watered every day at that point. But overall, if it's not raining 2-3 times a week, unless it's, really hot, like either it's in the 90s or the temperature has jumped, 10-20 degrees from the day before, in which case, they probably also need water. And this is the kind of thing where it's honestly just hard to read the plants if you don't have a lot of experience with them. I feel like I actually got a lot better at that this year just from growing container figs. I'm not gonna walk over there and show them, but basically I'm growing these fig trees in 10-gallon grow bags using basically like a mix of number 4 size perlite and HP Pro Mix and a little lobster compost. So it's not quite a soilless grow, but it's low soil relatively. And because of that, you have to kind of water them every day. But the nice thing about the figs is they're like super expressive. Like if they need water, it's like really, really easy to tell just because the leaves flop over. And then if you water them, they'll perk right back up within an hour or two. And I think just, with the fig trees, you're getting feedback on whether you're caring for them correctly or not, like 1,000 times more often than you're getting with the pawpaw trees. Like with the pawpaws, they're not going to die if you're not caring for them. But at the same time, like they're just not going to grow at all. Eventually they will, look upset, but it takes like a month or so to figure that out. Whereas, their needs are actually very similar to the fig trees. So if so by kind of like growing the figs and like observing what makes the figs happy, yeah, I've been able to really transfer that knowledge to the pawpaws pretty effectively. So I think that helps. So taking a step back again, of these 5 trees, the middle tree, the Naomi's Delicious, and the bottom tree, the Shenandoah, both have flower buds for next year, which again, after 14 and 16 months is like pretty crazy. Normally, it's at least 5 or 6 years before they even start producing flower buds, and maybe 7 or 8 years until you actually get fruit. But if you actually do put in the effort to take care of them correctly, then they really can grow a lot faster. And again, this isn't just one tree, it's 5 in a row. So I think that shows, at least a little bit of validity to the method. Obviously there's luck too. It's, there was like a big hailstorm that went a mile north and a mile south, so it's just luck that it didn't take out the trees. It's luck that none of the 4-year-olds in the street have like driven their power wheels into them or whatever. Yeah, so looking at this tree also, this is where the wood lignified last year, and it's like 3 feet 2 inches. The total tree's 7 feet 2 inches. So if it went at, into the ground at a foot, say, that means it grew a little over 2 feet last year and 4 feet this year, which is, again, pretty crazy. So according to the Peaceful Heritage website, Blake says that he's seen the medium-sized trees get up to 5 feet in their second season. And, this is a small tree. It got up to 7 feet. Again, take that for what it's worth. When I eventually do have fruit on these, maybe even next year, I'll post an update with tasting notes. Thanks.